Hey friends, it's Ryan, and welcome back to the KidMin Word. If you've been with me this week in Acts 4, you know that yesterday Peter stood in front of the Sanhedrin and declared that salvation is found in no one else but Jesus, that there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. And today we get to see how the council reacted. And honestly, their reaction is almost as remarkable as Peter's answer. Verse 13 says that when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated common men, they were astonished, and they recognized that they had been with Jesus. Now get that. When they saw the boldness of Peter and John, they perceived that they were common, uneducated, ordinary men. That's the council's own assessment. In their eyes, Peter and John had no business speaking with this kind of authority and confidence. They weren't trained as rabbis. They didn't have a formal education. Nothing that by the world standards should have produced this level of boldness and clarity. They were uneducated, common men, and they were astonished because they stood there with such confidence. And the council couldn't make sense of it using their own normal categories. So they landed on the only explanation that would fit. And that's the end of verse 13. They recognized that these men had been with Jesus. And that's it. That's the whole explanation. No education, no political connection. Time spent with Jesus was enough to produce that kind of courage. And then verse 14 adds another detail. But seeing the man who was healed standing beside them, they had nothing to say in opposition. There was nothing to say. There's nothing they could say. Because that man who had been healed was standing right there. The evidence was in the room, right? You can argue with an idea. It's a lot harder to argue with a healed man standing in front of you. So in verses 15 through 17, the council does something almost comical if it weren't so serious. But when they had commanded them to leave the council, they conferred with one another, saying, "What shall we do with these men? For that a notable sign has been performed through them is evident to all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and we can't deny it." Verse 17, "But in order that it may not spread any further among the people, let us warn them to speak no more to anyone in this name." The most powerful religious council in Israel, unable to deny miracle, reduced to trying to threaten it into silence. In other words, you just got to be quiet. Now that tells you something about the actual strength of their position. They had authority, but they didn't have truth on their side, and they knew it. Think about how many times you've watched something similar play out in your ministry. Someone can't argue with the fruit of what God is doing, so instead of dealing with it honestly, they try to manage it, contain it, quiet it down. And if that's ever happened to you, in a classroom disagreement, in a leadership meeting, a conversation in the hallway, your second guest, right? You're in the same company as Peter and John. Undeniable fruit doesn't always win people over right away. Sometimes it just gets people to scramble, right, for a way to try to control it. Now let me take a little side note for a second, because here's where I want to bring something. I want to share with you something exciting and something that fires us up at KidzMatter. This kind of unshakable confidence of just ordinary people equipped simply by time spent with Jesus is exactly the heartbeat behind why we do the KidzMatter Conference. This year's conference is October 6th, 7th, and 8th. Our conference is built for kids ministry leaders who don't necessarily have a seminary degree, a big budget, a fancy title, just people who love Jesus and want to serve kids well. And if that's you, I'd love for you to consider joining us. You can find all the details at KidzMatter.com. Put a Z in KidzMatter.com. All right, let's get back to the Bible now. Peter and John remind us that the qualification that God is looking for is not a diploma, it's proximity to Jesus. So keep showing up for that in your own life. Don't be surprised when people can't quite explain your confidence or what God's doing through you. Tomorrow we'll wrap up this whole scene. the council's ultimatum, and Peter and John's unforgettable response. This is the KidMin Word, and I'll see you back here tomorrow.